From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on May 10th, 2024, from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. On this episode of The Lede, we bring you the whole State House gang, folks, to talk about the end of the legislative session 2024 Sine Die. It's in the books. What happened? What made it to the governor? What's still being worked on? And what sadly died this year? To do that, we have Jeffrey Collins with the Associated Press, Joe Bustos with the state newspaper, Maayan Schechter with South Carolina Public Radio, and Mary Green from WIS-TV. This is her pod debut. Very exciting for Mary.
Welcome to the podcast.
And I will tell you that we did tape this on May 10th, the day after Sine Die, and it will be airing on This Week in South Carolina. But for the sake of convenience and for our new papa, we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste it and play it for you guys.
Gotcha.
And even though we're not going to use it in today's episode, there is no wind down. Shocker. Still listen, though. We do need you to do your duty and give us a shout at 803-563-7169. We love hearing from our listeners, our dear leaders out there. We want some more parenting advice for AT. Session's over. What did you guys want to see pass? What didn't get passed for you? Maybe something did. Let us know some of the bills that you were following. 803-563-7169. All right, folks, like I said, this was our conversation from This Week in South Carolina with several State House reporters that you'll hear from. The first one is Jeffrey Collins with the Associated Press, and he is the most senior reporter that was on the show with us. And I started off by asking him about that utility reform bill that had some roadblocks and where it's going right now.
Probably good you asked me, because it's one of those back in my day kind of things. You know, this story begins in the late 2000s with the Baseload Review Act, which allowed utilities to collect the money that they needed to construct power plants before they started to work. And then that leads us to 2017, when the two nuclear reactors that were planned at VC Summers, they didn't get finished. The SENG ran out of money, Santee Cooper ran out of money, they couldn't finish the project. So we fast forward to this year, when everyone agrees, senators, House members agree that South Carolina needs to produce more power. We're growing like crazy, both in the manufacturing sector and residential sectors. We just need more power. So the House decided to go ahead and work on a bill. In February, they introduced a bill, did about a month's worth of hearings. It's 60 to 70 pages. It does a lot of things. It has a lot of moving parts. Sent it to the Senate, which went back and remembered what things were like and put the brakes on it, because they remember that the problems that were created by things like the Baseload Review Act, which had a similar history. It was very quickly passed. It was a very complicated bill. No one took a really close look at it. So,
and then they had a $9 billion boondoggle at VC Summer.
Exactly.
We're still paying for it.
Ratepayers and taxpayers, $9 billion. So at this point, you know, the House passes the bill, but the Senate wants to take its time. So in the end, they put the brakes on it. There are going to be committee hearings, and the Senate's going to hold its own hearings and review the bill. Senate leadership promises they'll have something up at the beginning of next year. But what the Senate ended up doing is, instead of a 60 or 70 page bill that did a lot of stuff, they passed essentially what is like a memo that we get you. You know, that they agreed with all the House's findings about needing more power and needing more generation and you know, the state's growing, without actually doing anything.
Love that. But yeah, again, a lot of work in the off session, because that is such a complex bill, and there's a lot of regulatory changes in that bill too that they weren't really comfortable with.
Right, and it does things that they altered the structure of some of the regulatory things and of that nature after VC Summer and the nuclear debacle. So this would ratchet that back some, and you know, most of the House wasn't around at VC Summer, but most of the Senate was. So those long memories, they just weren't ready. They couldn't move forward that quickly on this. They wanted to be able to vet it out a little more.
Like I said, we're all paying for that still. Maayan, let's get to another dense topic here and talk about Judicial Merit Selection Commission reform. It's a pretty wonky thing, but judicial elections at the State House really do spur a lot of drama, especially now with a lot of folks talking about the state Supreme Court being an all-male court, the only one in the country right now. Tell us what reforms are in play right now and where that's all going.
Yeah, this has been, I think, one of the most intense
years where people have been so focused on JMSC. Again, a topic that most voters probably aren't naturally thinking about, how we elect judges in the state, but we've seen so much conversation from solicitors, from lawmakers, the Republican Attorney General. So I think first, if you wanted change, if you wanted this wholesale reform, you did not get it in this legislation. If you wanted lawmakers completely removed from the process, both the vetting process and the election process, you didn't get that either. You were unlikely to get that from the get-go. But there are a couple of areas where we did see House and senators kind of get locked in. One, on allowing the governor to have some appointment power. How many people, what exactly that looks like, again, remains to be seen. One of those issues they're going to have to work out in a conference committee, hash out those negotiations, and then come back and vote on it later in a special session. The other piece is that 3-candidate cap. So right now, the JMSC only allows 3 candidates to leave JMSC to be voted on by the full legislature. Both the House and the Senate agreed, okay, we could probably do away with that cap. But one has agreed, one has said that they want to do away with the cap entirely. The other has said maybe 6 is a better number. So that, again, is still an area where they're going to have to agree. A couple of the differences, the House in its version had something to dealing with magistrates, which is a process that the Senate really controls. Senate probably is unlikely to agree to those changes. I think one of the other eyebrow-raising provisions in the judicial change legislation is the Senate wants both the House and the Senate majorities to be able to elect judicial candidates, not a majority of the 170 member legislature. The House probably unlikely to agree to that change. They have a lot of power in this situation, and given the fact that the Senate has a lot of power on the confirmation process, I'm not so sure I see the House giving up that ability to elect, since they have 124 members, and of course the Senate has 46.
And like you said, that's still being hashed out still.
Being hashed out. They'll go to conference committee and have to agree to those changes and send it back out on the floor. But it does seem that there is at least a willingness to do some changes. But again, if you're one of those critics of the process who really wanted to see lawmakers completely removed, I mean, that was never going to probably actually happen, but you're going to be disappointed with this product.
It's a big lift to reform all that so quickly, too. Like, we're talking about energy, we're talking about judicial. I mean, it's a lot to go there with all the power playing going on. But you're talking about the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. They met this week twice to vet and qualify candidates for that upcoming vacant Supreme Court seat this summer, I should say. What did we learn about those candidates? Where do they go from here? Any early favorites?
Right. So there's going to be, I think, first of all, there's going to be a heavy focus and a lot of pressure on the legislature in the special or when they come back early next month to vote on the next justice. One, because there are no women on the court right now. And then 2, because the Chief Justice, Donald Beatty, who's the only black justice on the court, will retire this year. So 2 days worth of hearings. There were 6 candidates. 3 of those candidates were actually finalized by JMSC yesterday on Sine, and so they will go before the full legislature. One of them was Blake Hewitt, a white man. One was Letitia Verdon, a white woman, and then one was Jocelyn Newman, a black female justice. Within those 2-day hearings, there was a lot of talk about experience, but I think this election probably comes down to 2 factors. One, there's going to be a lot of focus on the diversity piece. The second piece of it is, I think especially after the state Supreme Court, when Justice Schechter was on the court, the lone female justice, and it overturned the original 6-week abortion ban, I think lawmakers, particularly Republicans, kind of sat back and said, you know, we really want a court that is more in line with our way of thinking and looks at our intent as a legislature, and we want it to be more philosophically conservative. And the Supreme Court, as we all know, has taken up some big issues over the last couple of years. We've had abortion now twice and maybe even a third or fourth time. We've had executions of death row inmates, and recently, and we're still waiting on a decision over the private school vouchers with public money. And those are big bills that the legislature passed, and the Republican-controlled General Assembly does not want to see a Supreme Court overturn their bills, their laws. And so I think there's going to be more focus on that particular piece of it. I mean, I do think the diversity issue is going to be a huge factor in this election, but I think how the court tilts conservatively is going to be another.
Yeah, and again, that's going back to what Well, we talked about the courts maybe being wonky, but this is where it affects people when it comes to laws in the state too. And June 5th is the election for that Supreme Court seat. So, Joe, I'm going to pivot to you. We saw some more anti-transgender legislation go through the legislature this year, including H 4624, which outlaws gender-affirming care for minors. What exactly does this do, and what made that a priority in the State House?
So it's an election year, and this type of bill will play very well with the Republican voters in the primary, and I think that's the big key about this. Now, the House kicked off their year with this bill, and it took a while for the Senate to pick it up, but it was a priority, according to Senator Massey, for the GOP caucus in the Senate. It bans surgeries, gender transition surgeries for anyone under 18. It bans the use of puberty blockers to help with the transition. And if a school district sees one of their students using pronouns that doesn't match their birth gender, they have to alert the parents. The governor's expected to sign this bill, but it will play well with those conservative voters in next month's primaries.
Yeah, and a lot of folks were saying this isn't really that big of an issue because, a lot of these services aren't exactly offered in the state too. But again, like you're saying, kind of a red meat issue for voters.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why you saw the House kick off their session this year's session with this particular bill. And there was questions about whether the Senate would bring it up. Senator Massey was talking about not wanting to bring up social issues during this year. But this one was a priority, and he said they were going to eventually get to it, and they finally did late in the session.
Yeah, I was going to say, here we are. Mary, speaking of other red meat issues too, we're talking about the critical race theory bill that has been stuck in a conference committee with 3 House and 3 Senate members since last June. And it's still in that conference committee. It's actually moving more and more these days. But that bill really codifies provisos that have already been in the budget. Again, K through 12 schools do not teach critical race theory or their concepts. But what will it make it to the governor's desk this year? It's been sitting there kind of in limbo. What's the status?
It certainly seems that it'll make it to the Governor McMaster's desk at some point soon. As you mentioned, that conference committee was formed about a year ago and hadn't met at all until this week. They met twice. They still have not come up with a compromise to send to the governor or to get approval with their chambers first. But essentially, this bill boils down to restricting what can and cannot be taught in South Carolina classrooms. A lot of us, as you mentioned, refer to it as the critical race theory bill, even though it never explicitly says the words critical race theory. But it is, a lot of these so-called banned concepts would be the ones that are associated with the tenets of critical race theory. Again, this conference committee is still hashing out some of those differences. The House and Senate are largely in agreement on their 2 bills, but they still do have a few outstanding disagreements they need to work out. Really, the big one is who would be eligible to file a lawsuit if they disagree with a decision about the appropriateness of classroom material or curricula, and when they would be eligible to file that lawsuit, having to go through certain required processes before they can actually do that. Again, still need to figure that out. The slight hiccup that could potentially be on the line is that they would need free conference to do this, which would require 2/3 support in both chambers. The House should be able to get that easily because they have that supermajority. Senate is going to need at least some Democratic support to get that 2/3. This is a bill that passed largely along party lines in both chambers. Democrats uniformly opposed it, and there was even some small, but some Republican opposition to it. So the question will be how that plays out over in the Senate. But generally, lawmakers seem optimistic that they'll be able to get that compromise, get this bill to the governor fairly soon.
And again, an election year with all 170 members of the General Assembly, 124 House members, and then the 46 senators up this year. So good for those June 11 primaries. And then also, Mary, another concept of that bill was dealing with, how far in advance teachers would have to let folks, the public, know when they're going to be teaching certain things, which a lot of people had issues with because it would crimp the ability to talk about current events, for example.
And that is another disagreement that they are still kind of working out and figuring out exactly what that would be like because the House and Senate language was a little different on those issues. So we'll have to see what they do. Their next meeting will be on June 5th when they come back for that judicial election. So we'll see what their compromise is at that point.
Yeah, even though it was Sine Day, we still have a little mini session, Jeffrey.
Of course.
It's time to cool the jets a little bit too, because there was a little bit of turmoil in the House chamber, a little rowdiness going on this past week in the final few days. There were some exchanges. It wasn't as, I'd say, raucous of a year so far, but this past week really ramped up. Tell us what happened specifically around that one bill, S915, which really helped with the restructuring of the health agencies of the state.
We had some drama, tension, a tinfoil hat,
tinfoil
some
hat.
parliamentary procedures that
Wasn't on my bingo card this year.
that left people confused. It was an interesting last hour or two of the session. What happened specifically on that bill is that bill would consolidate 6 South Carolina health agencies. It's kind of what happened after they broke up the Department of Health and Environmental Control. So now we're bringing all the health agencies together in one person in the governor's cabinet. So, and it's something the governor said in his State of the State address. Senate Finance Chairman Harvey Peeler wants it. Speaker Merle Smith wants it. It passed overwhelmingly in both chambers. So, but what it became later on in the session is a bargaining chip. And it became a bargaining chip for the House that wasn't happy that the energy bill wasn't being taken up by the Senate. So instead of taking it up a week or two before the session ended when there's plenty of time, it gets pushed to the last hour of session. And so what ended up happening is the Senate made some changes to the bill. It came back over to the House, and House rules say a bill needs to sit for 24 hours before it can be taken up, unless you get what's called unanimous consent. One lawmaker can object to that, and Josiah Magnuson did. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus. That's about 15 or so members, the most conservative members of the House for the most part. And they spent most of this year, being a little bit, they have an agenda. They want to push the Republican Party further right. They want to and they're not happy they don't get good committee assignments and things of that nature. So they've done some disruptive tactics all year long, including the day before asking that same 215-page bill be read on the floor, which would have taken literally the rest of the session to do. So set that up. They went ahead and objected. There's nothing anybody could do. Their hands were tied because it was the last day of session. So the Freedom Caucus took credit for it. Magnuson said, he didn't support the bill from the get-go. They felt like it creates a health czar, that it consolidates power too much. Supporters say that they're reading way too much into that. But they've been objecting to it throughout the process. In fact, they were most of the votes against it in the House. In the end, Magnuson also said he felt insulted, and that's why he voted against it. There was a red-haired puppet, Josiah Magnuson has very red hair, who was wearing a tinfoil hat that was on the House floor that day. And, all week, other members of the House, the more mainstream Republicans, have been, I don't want to say taunting, but they have been, talking about the Freedom Caucus members. And in fact, Representative Micah Caskey from West Columbia, put a tin hat on his head. And when the Freedom Caucus was trying to get a proviso into the budget that would allow people to spend gold or silver coins from the U.S. or foreign countries as legal tender in South Carolina. So he put his tinfoil hat on, so that was a crazy idea. That got ruled out of order. So to put all this together, basically what ended up happening is there's this long-running feud between mainstream Republicans, including the Speaker, and the Freedom Caucus that came to this head, and the bill died. That being said, it may not be completely dead. There may be some opportunities to revamp it. And the legislature does come back in full in about 8 months. And everybody says that's their first priority. So like most things, it's a little temporary.
Maayan, pick up that ball that Jeffrey was just running with there, too, because it was wild. I mean, at one point they were reading the bill, all, hundreds of pages. And then they also summoned, they invoked another rule where every member had to be in the chamber too, which meant like the, highway patrol had to be dispatched to find missing members. It was a lot of drama. Mary was living for it.
I was there.
She jumped in right before they locked the doors.
I want to be in the room where it happens, to quote Hamilton.
But Maayan, I wanted to ask you about that legislation because like Jeffrey was saying, it might not be dead yet, right? There's still maybe some little avenues. We've been hearing some rumblings. And they kind of also put this in perspective with the June 11th primaries coming up.
Right. Never say never about anything because it can be revived, it can die, it can be revived again. It's sometimes hard to know. And like you said before, the session, while Sine die did occur, we were all there to see it happen. The legislative session is not really at a close. They still have to come back for a special session, especially around the budget, which is really the most supreme piece of legislation that they will pass this year. And so we've talked about free conference powers. We've talked about, again, special session. We could see movement to perhaps revive the bill in that way, tack it on to a piece of legislation. But again, as Jeffrey mentioned, they're coming back next year. This will probably be at the top of the priority list, and we could see this this bill pass. Now, we don't know what the House or the Senate is going to look like, so shifting into the June 11th primaries, that could really change the dynamic, but it also could change the dynamic in a special session. You have folks who are potentially going to lose their seats. There are a lot of Republicans facing competition or challengers, including Democrats. You have lawmakers who aren't returning because they're retiring, or they're running for Congress, or they're running for the state Senate. And maybe they come back in a special session and go, you know what? I could get behind this. You know, you just don't know how those dynamics change things. And so I think the June 11th primaries, while it's really important because we're going to see whether or not the Freedom Caucus actually can win more seats, we're going to see whether there are going to be fewer women perhaps in the state Senate. So there are all these different kind of competing themes. But I do think for this particular bill, we should never say never about something that could potentially be revived and brought back. I mean, it's, you know, the legislature does crazy things sometimes.
Which gives us plenty to do in the off-season, too. And there's, of course, a whole state government and the governor to cover, too, in Congress. So we have plenty of things to do in the off-season. Don't give us too much more. But, Joe, I want to talk about the budget Maayan was talking about, because that is still kind of up in the air, too. Obviously, the House and the Senate both have their different versions. Tell us what they maybe agreed to and what the big differences are between them.
So teacher salaries, the pay schedule for teachers, that's set. I think that's a lot of people really care about that. Some of the big differences are we going to get, what type of tax cut are we going to get? Is it going to be a property tax cut for people who live in their owner-occupied homes, or is it going to be an income tax, an acceleration of the income tax? The Senate wants the income tax, House wants the property tax. We'll see what happens with that. There's also a difference on tuition mitigation, how much to spend on that, how much money to spend on Clemson's veterinary school, which is Harvey Peeler's big push. The House may not be all for that. Harvey Peeler put out, okay, I'm going to put in $175 million for the vet school, but I'll put $100 million for USC's health campus, trying to avoid the Clemson-USC fight. We still might get the Clemson-USC fight. And then money for DJJ, how much do they put into their master facility plan? Money for corrections and their cell phone interdiction program, and money for Department of Social Services for continuing that Michelle H. Lawsuit settlement. Those are some of the big things there. There's also a difference. I know that Maayan and Gavin care about this. State employee pay. How big of a raise are they going to get?
I mean, it's up to them.
The Senate wants to give a little bit more. The House is giving a little less. We'll see if they end up somewhere in between. But May 20th, we'll see more money from. We'll see if we get more money from the Board of Economic Advisors. If there's more revenue coming into the state, that might help solve some of these budget issues.
Yeah, more money, more problems, though, too.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But yeah, again, a lot of things still moving before the July 1st fiscal year starts. But Mary, when we're talking about money, we're talking about that $1.8 billion that is a discrepancy on the state treasurer's books. We had Senator Larry Grooms on recently talking about what his committee's looking into. They had an interim report looking into that. But of course, there's money in the budget now for a forensic audit. So we're spending millions to figure out billions, whatever you want to talk about there. But you recently asked the governor about this because he has a task force also working on this issue. What's the latest on that?
Well, the governor said that at this point, the task force is meeting weekly, and he's getting almost daily updates from the head of the Department of Administration, Marsha Adams, who's heading that task force, which also includes the Comptroller General, the Treasurer, who have really been at odds oftentimes during this whole dispute, along with their staffs from the auditor's office, the auditor himself, as well as the Attorney General's office. But again, the governor says they are meeting frequently. He says they are making a lot of progress. We're taking the governor at his word for this because these meetings are not open to the press. They're not open to the public. Ask the governor, why not? You know, this is a very large amount of money, theoretically. We still don't even know if this money is real, and that's one thing they're trying to figure out. But a large amount of taxpayer dollars involving state agencies headed by people elected by voters. And the governor says that this is something that really requires a lot of discussion, a lot of interplay between the staffs on sometimes sensitive financial information. And he says that oftentimes, in his view, when the cameras are in the room and there's an audience, as he put it, that could make some folks a little less willing to speak as transparently and as freely as they might behind closed doors. So we haven't actually been at these meetings, but again, governor says that they are progressing.
Yeah, especially now that the treasurer's actually attending those meetings because he didn't go to the first one. But we did hear House Speaker Merle Smith say that he does have confidence in the treasurer, whereas Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey was saying if there is a big issue that comes to light, then they might have to come back and deal with the treasurer at this point. So does the governor has some support there. Jeffrey, we had some other big issues happen in the beginning of this session too. What are some of those big bills that got passed that we kind of maybe forgot about too?
I think the single biggest one is the open carry of weapons bill, which allows anybody that can legally own a gun to carry that weapon in public where it's allowed. And that's been a push for a long time, and it will alter a lot of things. I mean, police agencies are having to alter how they, encounter people. I mean, used to be if you saw someone carrying a gun, that was an immediate, everything stopped and you could, question them and everything. Now it's legal. So that was probably the biggest bill of this session, it seems like, especially in the early part. There's been some other things that have passed, mostly, I mean, not these huge issues like the energy bill, but like, they're going to remove the sales tax from feminine hygiene items. They're going to, they created a new category of crime, which is organized retail crime. And we have a new official state seabird, the brown pelican.
The brown pelican.
Yes, and it comes to it joins things like, the official state snack, boiled peanuts.
Hospitality beverage.
Yes,
Tea.
yes. The official state dances, of course.
The shag.
The shag. And the latest one before this was the Venus flytrap, the state's official.
It would be a session if we did get a new emblem or something.
Yes.
Jeffrey, Maayan, we have less than 2 minutes left, and a big bill that did not make it across the finish line this year was Senator Tom Davis's medical marijuana bill. This has been Sisyphus pushing this boulder up the hill a lot. What happened there? And Tom Davis, again, was key in that 915 bill that fell apart right there at the end.
If there was a legislator that had the toughest year, it might be Tom Davis. Medical marijuana for a second session did not go anywhere. It came out of the Senate yet again, and this time, the House the first time killed it on a procedural move. This time they didn't even allow it to come up for a vote on the House floor. We talked to House leadership yesterday, and what they said was, one, there didn't seem to be enough support, especially in the GOP caucus, to even talk about this, even though there was a companion bill filed by a Republican in the House. But besides that, also law enforcement was opposed to it. Primarily SLED Chief Mark Keel, who has basically said, I'm not going to be supportive of medical cannabis until the FDA takes action on it. So Tom Davis, medical marijuana, energy, health, he's had quite a legislative
doing
session.
all that work. And then, of course, we heard from Senator Majority Leader Shane Massey talking about there might not even be support to do it again next year because they've already voted twice on this bill.
Right, voted twice, and then again, you have the primaries. You don't know if the chamber is going to become even more conservative, so there could be less of an appetite to even touch this issue.
Well, that's the show, folks. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of that. Again, there was a lot of drama going on in the State House this week, and we'll be continuing to keep up with a lot of the different things that are still happening in Columbia leading up to the start of the new fiscal year on July 1st, so we'll be bringing you updates until then for sure. Now, of course, give us a shout. Let us know, 803-563-7169, what's on your mind, some parenting advice. We'll have a wind down in next Tuesday's episode, and you can always give us a review on Apple Podcasts, too, if you like that. And you can stay up to date with the latest news on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
I was told look at Gavin. That's all I was told to do.
Okay.
Yes, it's me having a staring contest.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna kind of switch it up. So don't be alarmed if I make
I knew this was gonna be a problem, Mary. That's why I've resisted having you on the show.